In fact, the history of the JF-17 has had its ups and downs. The beginning of the story dates back to the 1980s, when the Pakistan Air Force was looking to replace its aging inventory of fighter jets. There were basically two options before them. Either they could buy from the world's leading countries in this field, as they had done in the past, or they could manufacture their own aircraft. The latter was, of course, more difficult, more planned, and more importantly, it meant opening a door whose end was unpredictable. In the defense industry, aviation meant billions of dollars. It also created an obligatory bond between the producer country and the customer country that would last for decades. And the selling country always had the advantage over the buying country. Pakistan, of course, knew that the second option was better for it. But there were still questions to be answered, and each one was critical. The most important question was, who should help Pakistan to build its own aviation industry and why? Moreover, until now, they had always solved this problem through foreign procurement. At this point, they were also keeping an eye on India. They too were working on developing their own airplanes. And of course, Pakistan did not want to fall behind and lose the race. India wanted to produce a light jet fighter to replace its MiG-21s. Pakistan, on the other hand, had J-7s from China, which were also developed on the MiG-21. Now they wanted to be able to build a low-cost aircraft like it. Let's share a brief information about the MiG-21 here. Of course, there was a reason for insisting on the MiG-21 or a similar aircraft. This platform was one of the most cost-effective aircraft not only for the Soviets but for the entire world aviation. This was one of the main reasons why it was used by many countries for many years. Pakistan wanted to equip the J-7 or F-7 as it was exported with fully Western avionics. The project was named Sabre 2. Technical support was received from the American company Grumman. American Grumman was in close contact with the Chinese aircraft manufacturer Chengdu. Although nowadays Washington-Beijing is characterized by trade wars, cyber operations, or high tensions in the Pacific, the situation was different in those years. America wanted to distance China from the Soviet Union so that the Soviet Union would become even more isolated. To this end, a series of agreements were signed with Beijing. China could now trade with the West and transfer technology. Let's continue by drawing attention to the effects of this decision taken that day on today's world and China's unstoppable rise. The Chinese Chengdu and the American Grumman worked together to develop a fighter called the Super 7 based on the F-7 aircraft. The avionics would be taken from another aircraft also produced for the United States. For the engine, it was agreed to provide a more powerful one than the existing one. Many of the issues agreed on paper were confronted with completely different realities in the field. For example, the MiG-21 and F-7 had no radar. This was because they had air intakes in the nose of the aircraft. The solution was not delayed. The air intakes would be moved to both sides of the fuselage. Radar would be added to the space opened in the nose. This seemingly easy change was not only difficult in terms of engineering, but also caused the cost to multiply. In its report on the process, American Grumman drew attention to the increasing cost. Pakistan did not have enough budget to complete this work. They faced the inevitable. The project was cancelled. But costs were not the only reason why the Sabre 2 project was shelved. Two separate events in 1989 had a greater impact on the cancellation of the project. It was one of the biggest events in Chinese history. Hundreds of demonstrators were killed in the student protests that broke out in Tiananmen Square. America imposed an embargo on China after these events. Pakistan also got its share of this embargo. According to the US, Pakistan was working on a secret nuclear weapons program. American technical personnel had left the country. The Pakistani Air Force was the most affected by the American embargo. For nearly 10 years, they faced a very serious arms embargo. America did not deliver the F-16s that it had even paid for then, just like it does nowadays. All the capitals that Pakistan knocked on the door to buy fighter jets, the US somehow got there first and said, "Don't sell." China stepped in again in 1991 after internal events, renaming the project Fighter China. Pakistan rejoined the project in 1995. China and Pakistan were to develop the aircraft together. Technical support would be received from abroad for the electronics and engine. The first support came from Mikoyan, the original designer of the MiG-21. The French, British and Italians were to lend a hand with the electronics. South Africa promised technical support for air missiles. The FC-1, with the new name given by China, was planned to go into production in 1999. In the background, however, the American embargo remained strong. India also did its best to undermine the project. In fact, the Russians had kept their promise on the engine that powers the MiG-29. South Africa was still positive about providing air missiles. Despite years of efforts, the project did not receive the desired support from Western countries. The project remained on paper, so to speak, and did not move forward. In 1998, Pakistan and China agreed to build the airframe. Yang Wei was appointed to head the project. With the implementation of computer-aided designs and Yang Wei's leadership, the project gained momentum. The prototype was built in 2002. In order to shorten the process and reduce costs, the technologies used in the J-10 aircraft were integrated into the JF-17. The JF-17 Block 1 made its maiden flight on August 25, 2003. Finally, Pakistan's dream had come true. Since the Pakistanis developed the project jointly with China, they called it Joint Fighter. The number 17 was inspired by the F-16. Thus, the project had two names. The JF-17 was the fastest project in Chinese aviation history. Yang Wei was later involved in the development of many other aircraft. He was also the chief designer of the J-20 project. Yes, the first flight was extremely important, but all is not lost. The two countries had a long way to go before mass production. Moreover, technology was developing rapidly and there were constantly parts that needed to be updated, so it was not until 2007 that the aircraft was put into mass production. The fuselage and engine work may have been done, but the plane had Chinese avionics. Pakistan knocked on the door of Western companies with hope. Due to American pressure, a negative response was expected again. The calendars were showing the 2000s and the world was going through very interesting times. After the September 11th attacks on the Twin Towers, America invaded Afghanistan. In the process, Pakistan became more important in many ways. Washington was forced to relax embargoes. It was at this time that Western companies started to make requests. Nobody said no to Pakistan, but it was as if the process was being deliberately prolonged. Even months later, there were no concrete developments. Meanwhile, the JF-17 was still cooking in the kitchen and serious improvements were being made. After a while, Pakistan and Turkey even crossed paths in an interesting way. We will get to this point, but first let's talk about the technical details of the JF-17. 58% of the airframe is produced in Pakistan. The rest is manufactured in China. All parts of the aircraft are assembled in Pakistan and mass production is also carried out here. Initially, only aluminum was used in the production of the fuselage. However, fourth-generation fighter jets prioritized maneuvering, which necessitated a lighter fuselage. For this reason, composite materials were used. In the first block, the JF-17 was not very advantageous. However, composite materials were used a lot in the second and third blocks. With the updated Block 2 version, JF-17s gained aerial refueling capability. These aircraft have a combat radius of 900 kilometers without carrying external fuel tanks. Combat radius refers to the maximum range at which a fighter can operate and return. With external fuel tanks, the combat radius of the JF-17 increases to 1741 kilometers. The JF-17 uses the Chinese KLJ-7 radar. The radar can see targets on the sea surface from 135 kilometers away. It can detect an F-16-sized target from almost 80 kilometers away. It is said that these radars can detect and track 10 separate targets simultaneously. It can fire beyond line-of-sight missiles at 2 of these targets. While we are on the subject of missiles, let's share some details on this subject. The JF-17 Block 2 can fire the PL-12 radar-guided air-to-air missile with a range of 70 to 100 kilometers. The Block 3 model has the AESA version of the same radar. JF-17 Block 3s can also fire the PL-15 air-to-air missile. There is no clear information about these missiles. However, open sources state that the range of the export model is 145 kilometers. The first block of aircraft produced had 7 separate weapon stations. They have a total ammunition carrying capacity of 1500 kilograms. By adding an 8th weapon station to the Block 3 model, it can carry avionics pods without sacrificing weapon capacity. A wide range of weapons can be used from air-to-air munitions to bombs with very different characteristics and even anti-ship missiles. The JF-17 is also equipped with a 2-barreled 23mm cannon. When we add all these together, we see a multi-role aircraft. Although the JF-17 mainly uses Chinese-made ammunition, we also see that Pakistan-developed weapons are also used. The JF-17 has an open architecture design so that different avionics and weapons can be easily integrated. Here we would like to emphasize the open architecture design. There are generally two different approaches in aviation. One is open architecture design, which, as the name suggests, means that anyone who wants to can integrate the most suitable weapon systems in some way. The other option is aircraft that only the manufacturer can add or subtract. Many manufacturing countries prefer closed architecture for commercial reasons and to better protect their military secrets. Thus, the country that produces the aircraft can sell the munitions it produces. Here, the manufacturer has a say in the munitions to be purchased by the user country. They can even demand extra costs for weapon integration. As you know, Poland signed a multi-billion-dollar contract with South Korea for the purchase of T-50 fighter jets. They were going to give their MiG-29s to Ukraine and retire the Su-22s in their inventory. The 48 new aircraft from South Korea were to enter the inventory at intervals. Poland thought it could use its American-made air-to-air missiles on the planes without any problems. After all, one of the manufacturers of this aircraft was South Korea and the other was the United States. Moreover, South Korea had T-50s that could fire American-made missiles without any problem. The math didn't add up, and the planes that arrived in Poland could not be integrated with American-made air-to-air missiles. According to Poland, South Korea had promised to do so. South Korea claimed this was not true. They had opened the contract and looked at it. The price Poland paid did not include the cost of integrating the missiles. The contract only included the feasibility of integrating these missiles. Poland had to pay extra to integrate the missiles. Following this recent example, let's move on to open architecture systems. Here, universal hardware systems and universal software languages are used. Therefore, when it comes to integrating a new weapon system or avionics system into the aircraft, this can be done more easily. Let's take a concrete example again. In 2016, the Pakistan Air Force wanted to purchase a precision targeting pod for the JF-17. Damocles, manufactured by Thalys, was the first preferred system. Pakistan was again confronted with the same obstacles we have told you about before. At this point, Aselsan stepped in. Asel pod was successfully tested and integrated in 2017. This paved the way for the JF-17 to launch many guided missiles, some of which were produced by our defense industry. At the beginning of the video, we said that these planes could start a new era between Pakistan, Azerbaijan and Turkey. Following the announcement of the purchase of the JF-17 by Baku, claims that the aircraft will be equipped with Bozdoğan and Gökdoğan missiles manufactured by Roketsan came to the agenda. It is possible to integrate these missiles into the open architecture JF-17. In addition, the KLJ-7A radar, which we mentioned earlier, has modes that can fire NATO-made air-to-air missiles. Air-to-air missiles are highly strategic systems. For this reason, countries prefer manufacturers with whom their relations will not deteriorate. Azerbaijan's preference for Turkey is therefore not surprising. However, there is another question at this point. What will China say to this integration? China's position from the very beginning has been based on exporting JF-17. Beijing has been offering the JF-17 to many countries. The fact that these aircraft can use air-to-air missiles manufactured to NATO standards actually makes their job easier. For now, the JF-17 is being used in Myanmar and Nigeria in addition to Pakistan. It is rumored that Iraq is also interested in the aircraft and will be the next user. As you can see, the fighter jet that Pakistan and China have created with great difficulty has a high export potential. When we put all this together, the question, how successful is this project, becomes even more meaningful. First of all, the JF-17 is a relatively cheap fighter jet. It also has low sustainment costs and can easily integrate weapons. These advantages put it one step ahead of its competitors in its class. The JF-17's features are a boon for countries with small surface areas. No need for a large number of aircraft and limited defense budgets. However, an important detail should not be overlooked here. In such strategic purchases, the priority of countries is not cost but political issues. In addition, the experience Pakistan has gained in this project is something that cannot be bought with money. They have an aircraft of their own production, and this alone makes the JF-17 project successful.